Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read along podcast. The Wheel of Time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
That is your host, Greg, who somehow still knows very little about the Wheel of Time, even though he usually pretends otherwise.
And that is Tylor, our resident expert, who makes sure you know how much he knows about the Wheel of Time.
It's a lot. Join us each week as we continue our journey through Robert Jordan's great fantasy epic, exploring the books, the television show, ill-advised discussions of visual media on a non-visual podcast, and so much more. Although actually not, it's just that.
Yes, all that and actually nothing else as we travel on, and I know what this means now, through the glass columns.
Yeah, he really doesn't know all that much.
No, you don't know that much.
Hello. Welcome back to Through the Glass Columns. By gosh, this is your weekly read-along Wheel of Time podcast. I'm your host, Greg. So happy to be joining you this week to guide us through not one, not two, but three chapters from Lord of Chaos, Book 6 of the Wheel of Time. Those chapters, of course, are Chapter 42, The Black Tower, Chapter 43, The Crown Roses, and Chapter 44, The Color of Trust. Sometimes I pause dramatically because my fingers stick and I can't flip over my notes pages fast enough. But
Yeah,
it's
me
all
too.
good. Hey, I haven't introduced you yet. Please don't speak. Joining me for the first time today is Tylor. Tylor, how's it going?
Good. I'll be honest. I now jump in just to get you to do your angry Greg voice once an episode or so. It's worth doing. I had a really good time with these chapters, and I actually found myself wondering whether one of your observations from previous books was what was driving that. I remember a few books ago you said this podcast is better when we are in multiple characters' heads over the course of a single week, and I kind of left these chapters trying to decide whether they were actually like fun, momentous, like interesting chapters, or if I just liked them because we had like four different POV characters all doing very different, interesting things. What's your take on that? Did you like these chapters, and how do you think that dynamic of quick glimpses into characters' heads does or doesn't play into your opinion?
I did like these chapters, and I would say I think it's a little of that and just that the developments in each plot line were significant. Not like the most significant crazy twist, but it's like it felt like real strong momentum. Like, oh, this is something we've been waiting to happen in this plot line. Oh, this is actually something I didn't expect, but something pretty interesting. So I want to read that, and then jumping into the third as well. So, I enjoyed these chapters. We were joking last episode already that we're in the piece where I definitely, it's summer, so I just sat and read like 250 pages of a book today. I would have sat and read 200 pages in this, but it's fun. It is. I complain lovingly about our format, but I do think it's really fun to kind of piecemeal this out and make a meal of it, and get to enjoy that. Because, when I do that in a fantasy book, I end up, kind of skim reading certain sections or just kind of racing through and not letting things land. So our format and this process let us really land on them, which is nice. And I hope listeners find the same thing, especially if you read it and then get that chance to kind of hear our discussion and think about it a little bit more.
And I think that actually the first of the three chapters we have this week is a really great example of that, where some of the iconography and the symbolism is something that I remember, for the entire series. But there are a lot of like interesting character beats here that I think I would have never noticed if we hadn't spent a full week on these three chapters in them alone. What am I talking about specifically? You can find out in my summary of Chapter 42, The Black Tower. Rand invites Min to the farm, but she seems panicked by the idea of men channeling, and she says that she should return to the Aes Sedai. She denies the escort that he offers, telling him that he should rest, and then she gives him a light kiss and leaves. Rand thinks that she's just teasing him and clearly doesn't understand what her feelings actually are, and then Rand takes 2 bags of commissioned work from a silversmith and a goldsmith, and then he thinks on the rumors in the city of an Aes Sedai and also no rumors of Taim and his men, and so he thinks they must be following his recommendations. He finds himself staring in Alana's direction and realizes that she and Varen are with the embassy, making 11 Aes Sedai all in one place. He travels to the farm thinking that he doesn't need any escort and he doesn't want to have a crowd of Aiel cause any problems at the farm, and he arrives to a thriving area with new construction and over 100 students. Channeling and the sword are both being practiced all around him, and when Rand introduces himself to a guard, the guard is a little bit disrespectful, and Taim promptly knocks him out with the one power. We then get a few details about how the training is going on in this area, and it becomes clear that Taim is just as hard on everyone. At this point, Lews Therin begins saying that he should have killed him long ago and ranting about how people need to die, specifically Taim in most cases. And then Rand learns from Taim that the students have begun to call the farm the Black Tower. He thinks that this is a humble beginning for something, but then Rand also thinks that it will not have time to grow into anything because the last battle is so near. Taim then assembles the students, and Rand notes that they are from all over the world, and he hopes that there hasn't been none taken from Ilion, where that would cause problems with the Forsaken. He then tells them that the tower is divided, and he names them Ashaman, which means Guardians of Truth and Justice, but only when they have finished their training will they be Ashaman. New arrivals are soldiers, and once they get more training, they become dedicated and get a sword pin from one of the works that the silversmith did. Eventually, they become an Ashaman and get a gold dragon pin, and he gives Taim the first of these, but notes that Taim seems unhappy, and then eventually Rand finishes with a call to victory, but there is no reaction from the crowd. Eventually, Taim invites him for wine, and Rand spots Sora Grady once again, clearly still upset at Rand. Rand then compliments Taim's recruiting, and Rand directly asks Taim about why he has been in such a prickly mood since Rand arrived, and Taim very clearly directly suppresses his rage, and then he says that the Aes Sedai in the city worry him because 11 is too close to 13, especially since there have been rumors of Reds who fled the city and other Reds who are arriving in the countryside. Lews Therin then begins to rant once again about killing Taim and also about killing his own family, and then Rand yells at Lews Therin before realizing he is shouting out loud. Taim says that Rand must hold on to his sanity, but Rand only replies that he won't fail. Then he asks about the Reds in the countryside, and he threatens Taim if anything happens to the Aes Sedai in Caemlyn. Rand eventually says he intends to teach those Aes Sedai to dance to his flute, and then wonders how long it's been since he's seen his flute, and Taim is clearly nervous about his sanity. So this was a really interesting chapter. As I said, I will never forget the dragons and the sword pins. That's something that I kind of use as like a memory of what the Black Tower is. But other than that, there's a lot of really interesting kind of character moments in this chapter that it's really easy to miss. What do you take away from this one?
Yeah, it's funny. I found myself, I don't know why, thinking a lot about Buster Bluth from Arrested Development, and when he's lying about being in the Army and he's like showing off his prizes that he got in a claw machine. It was like, I
got
Army
the
had a
seat
half
for
day.
marksmanship.
Army gave me these prizes. It's like there was something kind of it's obviously all regimented, and there's a reading of this chapter like this is being set up like what those of us who came of age in the 2000s would call like a terrorist camp or maybe a cult camp or something like that, with levels and badges. But there's something about it that for whatever reason didn't feel totally serious to me, and maybe because it's so focused on like the trinkets instead of the mark, like how you earn them, which is clarified, but it's much more like, and you get a shiny dragon and a nice sword. So I don't know. It was funny because I felt like I should be feeling this as very menacing, because I mean it kind of is an indoctrination, and I mean, it's like how they get people to sell Tupperware too, but it's like a pyramid scheme, but it is a kind of system that should, I think, feel more serious than it ultimately did for me. I also thought with black in this universe doesn't necessarily mean evil in the way we sometimes associate those things, the dark side in our world. And so it was funny to me, because there's a long running joke in Star Wars about like, if you're in the Empire and they tell you you're assigned to the Death Star, do you still think you're the good guys?
Yeah.
Like, and I kind of feel like this had a little edge of that. Like, we're gonna be the Black Tower. It's like, you don't sound like the good guys in that. But I think that's a little more. That's a little unfair. I think to them you could be the good guys because you're just balancing the White Tower.
Well, and I think that there's something very interesting in both of those things you're describing of Rand getting really close to what we feel like would be like a great decision or good leadership, and then it just feels ever so slightly off, right? We can tell that he's trying to get the Ashaman to focus on like justice and protecting people, but as you say, he's doing it by focusing on these ranks rather than like the message, the story. And I actually wanted to kind of compare that to the beginning of the chapter when Rand and Min are left alone and Rand gets a kiss from the pretty girl and immediately is like, she's just teasing me because of that time I said she was like a sister. And Rand kind of almost getting there feels kind of like what is happening later on in the chapter is Rand almost gets it, but he's not quite understanding what it is that motivates people. He just kind of knows the things that go along with them.
That's a nice connection, I think, between those moments. I was kind of stuck on the fact that Min's like last week, I'm here, I'm yours forever, like we're tied together. And then he's like, you want to come to my secret camp? And she's like, nah, I don't think so. Like,
yeah.
that's a little rough. And so it's funny to me. I guess that could almost be another example of like, he's almost there to a good relationship. But even those that are binding themselves to him forever are saying like, you're not making the greatest choices.
Yeah. And I think that there's something I think really important about Rand having a reason to be hesitant about Min, right? Because that last chapter was very much her being like, I am all yours. I will tell you everything that you need to know about the Aes Sedai. I will not betray you. And now her being so doubtful about men who can channel is something that Rand is immediately going to probably have like some sort of complex around Min and his madness and what effect that is having on him. And so I think that's really important as a character beat for Robert Jordan to set up that is not just going to be a simple, easy relationship where everyone is happy with everything. And then Rand shows up at the Black Tower, and it's called the Black Tower, and we learn things like Ashaman and Soldier and Dedicated. I know that you already kind of said it felt a little hollow. I'm curious then what you think the kind of soldiers in the audience are thinking, because there's this odd thing at the end where they don't respond, and then Taim's kind of like seemingly almost bitter mood about all of it makes me kind of wonder what structure or what training was already there and how much of it Rand is kind of pressing against with this new thing he's establishing with no consultation, really.
Back into that question by saying I was unnerved by how much I was agreeing with Luz Theron in this section of it. So I was feeling like, yes, you should just kill this guy. Like, this guy is bad news. And I think that speaks to your question in that you're picking at the fact that this feels like it's going to be a rift that the people in the soldiers in the Black Tower may go with Taim, right? That he's the one who recruited them. He's the one who's been managing their training. I don't know. The school district I grew up in, we had like our principal that we, whatever. It's an elementary school principal. You don't dislike them too much. They're pretty cool. And then, we would have the superintendent in my school district would visit every once in a while. And there was always this vibe of like, who's this guy, right? Like, why is he challenging us, or why does he show up? And I think that's the relationship here because, Rand's not on the ground with them all the time. They're not building a relationship. So I think if it came to blows, they would go with Taim.
Yeah, and I think that that's the really interesting question is what is it that Taim has been kind of preaching or promoting that Rand isn't privy to? I'm left with this kind of really direct question that I just want Rand to ask someone other than Taim, and he doesn't get a chance to or doesn't want to, it seems like. You mentioned Lews Therin, and I want to pick at one thing that Lews Therin says that is very interesting here. Lews Therin is kind of rambling on and on about, like, I should kill him, he's terrible, he needs to die. But one of the things that he says immediately upon seeing Mazrim Taim is, I should have killed him long ago. And that strikes me as an odd one, given that we met Mazrim Taim relatively recently. I'm kind of curious your take on how much Lews Therin is actually responding to what's in front of him, or how much he's maybe like conflating Mazrim Taim with other powerful male channelers, because you can kind of take it either way depending on how sane you think the voice in Rand's head is.
Well, and the question makes me think about that is how Lews Therin would engage with a Forsaken, and we have some missing Forsaken around, right? That's the kind of attitude he gives towards these other figures that he actually has known a really long time ago. But that feels like looking at the back of the worksheet first or something to get the answers, since it was your question. So I would say in the moment, I certainly took that as like, oh, I've already let him go too far. I should have nipped his ambition in the bud as soon as I met him, right?
Yeah.
Because Taim has been angling for this the whole time, and now it's coming to fruition, seemingly in a way that is perhaps too late to stop now.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting to have that kind of question lingering of who or what is Taim, right? He shows up more or less out of nowhere multiple times in this book and the previous one, and just can channel really well and knows a bunch of stuff. And it's very easy to get lost in the question of, like, is he a Forsaken? Is he kind of one of those, like, in the gray characters that is not necessarily evil but might not be exactly on Rand's side? There's a lot of ambiguity to that character, and because we get so kind of brief glimpses of him, it feels like this conversation with him towards the end of the chapter is, we've got to kind of pick it apart and figure out, what do we actually think of this dude, because it's the first time since maybe the end of the last book that we've really gotten any information on him. So what do you think about Taim after this? He seems very pragmatic, and it seems very obvious that he is putting on a face in front of Rand, and he forgot to put on that face for part of this conversation.
I think my gut on him is that he is bad news and disloyal. And so my main emotion in that last scene was that Rand has shown way too much of his weakness across this chapter, right?
Yeah.
Both in the way you mentioned before, that he's not a completely effective leader, and in that he's slowly losing his mind, right? Like, again, we don't necessarily always read it as crazy, but it's clear that Robert Jordan wants us to understand that there's no reason Taim wouldn't think he was just absolutely slipping into insanity.
Yeah, and I actually want to add one more thing to your list of ways that Rand is kind of crumbling a little bit. He, in the past couple books, has been constantly surrounded by walls of Aiel, and in the first half of this book, his fight was to get his guard down to 2 when he was in the palace, and now those 2 are standing outside of the room, and he's just channeling from inside of the room. He is completely exposed here. If Taim wanted to do something to take down the Dragon Reborn, there aren't even spears around him that need to be defeated before that could potentially happen. I think Rand's kind of sense of safety is overinflated, and I'm not sure if that's madness or not, but it's worrying.
And I am remembering correctly that Taim was somebody who said, like, I don't believe in chosen ones. I could have gotten those tattoos. It could just as easily be me, right? That was him.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, that all seems like the calculation is there to, like, be ready if Rand is falling apart to be the guy.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. This is a really interesting character in that he feels like the next in line. He feels like the number 2, and he feels like we do not want him anywhere near power based on the couple of interactions we've had with him. I don't have too much else to add here other than it feels somewhat ominous that Rand thinks he is going to just cause the Aes Sedai to do whatever he wants. Any final thoughts on this chapter?
I think it'll come up in the next one, but just the fact that, again, he's sensing that we're getting a lot of Aes Sedai gathering, right? And that, he sees that threat, but I do agree that that seems to be a little at odds with that other thought he had that that he can control the.
Yeah, and I just want to add kind of real quick at the end of that, the note that there are reds in the kind of not the city, but like maybe the exurbs would be the equivalent, like out but still in the general vicinity, makes me really concerned about the fact that Rand is already counting to 11, because it only requires 1 or 2 of them to go in the city before 13. That seems to be the barrier that Rand will not allow to be crossed. So that just feels like a kind of a red flag that seems to be headed towards us. Chapter 43. The Crown of Roses. Marana remembers a previous challenging negotiation, hoping that what she has just begun will not be the same. Min sits with her eyes closed as the Aes Sedai study her. They've realized that she loves Rand because they are just coming back from their first meeting with Rand, and they know now that they won't trust her with any private information. They arrive at their hotel, and Min slips out, very likely to go see Rand. They go to a private room with all 11 of them, plus Varen and Alana, and Marana reports that she doesn't know if Ilana is the cause of Rand being sharp, but he is very clearly not pleased with the Aes Sedai. Varen asks if he has set new restrictions on them, saying that they need to avoid panicking him, and Marana worries that while Ilana must defer to her, Varen actually has precedence over her in the hierarchy, and so there's concerns about who will actually be leading this group in the future. Rand apparently told them to avoid the Black Tower or there would be serious consequences, but that was the only new restriction that was added on them. They apparently use Alana to identify his location, but she only wants to talk about the wound on Rand's side, which she thinks should be unbearable. Alana now seems to claim some degree of ownership over her warder, even though she does seem upset about any harm that may have been caused to him by the way that he was bonded. At this point, they say that Rand exceeded their expectations for stubbornness, and they acknowledge that he likely learned from Moraine. Apparently, he tried to intimidate them with crowds of Aiel, and Alana seems relieved that she has not ruined Rand, and at this point Marana says that Rand must be brought to heel, and Varen asks how, with Marana beginning to explain her plan that involves the nobles in the city. We then switch to Dylan's POV, who questions Kyron Sedai about Elaine and her place on the throne. We then switch to Luan, who talks to Rafaela Sedai, convincing him that it would be better if Rand left, and finally we switch into Elorian's POV, who asks an Aes Sedai who would sit on the Lion Throne and is given a non-answer by the Aes Sedai. So lots of politicking here. What did you take away from our shortest chapter, but maybe the one that is most consequential in terms of letting us know where this book might be going?
I mean, my direct answer is I feel like they're going to make a play, right? And I don't know that prior to this chapter, I had seen that in the cards for this book. We've had lots of hints about 13 Aes Sedai gathering and that this could always be possible. And yet it didn't really feel like anybody was going to go for it. But after this chapter, it's like, well, this group, I think this will be the climax of this set of plot lines, which is they will make a play for Rand. And, given that this is only book 6, I assume fail, but we'll see some consequences of that.
So I actually thought that one of the really fun things about this chapter was getting it from Marana's POV. Both because it is kind of a fresh set of eyes. I don't think we've really interacted with Marana much at all, much less been in her POV. But also, it's really interesting to see an experienced Grey Aja interacting with Rand, because she kind of in her backstory, as she's describing it, has all of this experience interacting with like kings and leaders and generals, and yet Rand kind of has her on her back foot, it feels like, in this chapter. And getting to see that kind of like experienced but not knowing what to do with Rand perspective is something I don't know we've gotten in a couple of books.
Yeah, and am I right that Marana is, like, not in Rand's counting? That's the way to interpret her, right? Or is she one of the ones he was counting?
She's one of the ones he was counting.
Okay. So because I kind of felt like it was almost like confirmation that there were now a couple extra around, but she's one of the original embassy?
Yeah, so she is one of the embassy from Saladar. There are 9 of them, plus Varen and Alana makes 11.
Well, and I'll note within that I also didn't expect Saladar to be the one that made the play, right? Like, if anybody was going to try to take down Rand, I thought it would be the White Tower. And I think I've made predictions on this very show that the Saladar rebels would just, go with Rand and start forming things up. And, I think that could still be true because Egwene is now in charge, but clearly all these people started moving before Egwene was in charge. So it's all kind of a tangle in a positive way. I certainly don't mean that as a criticism. And then it's not that I forgot, but it's like in the mix of things, the fact that Rand is, bonded, and we got hints in the last chapter and in this chapter more directly about like, this is really a flow of information, even if neither of them gets like a complete picture of what the other is up to.
Yeah, I actually really like that you brought up the similarity between what this embassy is doing and what the embassy from Tar Valon is doing, because I actually thought the structure of this chapter reminded me of maybe like 10, 15 chapters ago when the Tar Valon embassy arrived in Cairhien. There was a very similar structure where we cut away to 3 different nobles, each of whom was talking about what it would be like when Rand was no longer in the city. And so seeing just how similar those two groups are operating, despite the fact that I agree with you, we think of them as being so different and having such different motivations, really kind of drove home that maybe Rand isn't completely wrong to be taking the standoffish position he is. I think there's a part of me who wanted to read this chapter and go like, oh, Rand is really kind of alienating his allies, but I leave this chapter much more doubtful about whether these are his allies.
Well, what came to mind as you were talking is like that old, cliche, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And it's like that could almost work to pair off all of these together.
Yeah, that doesn't
right?
work if it's a triangle.
Yeah. So it's a triangle where everybody hates each other. And so any two of them could come together to hurt the other one, perhaps. And so maybe it is. I certainly before this chapter had read the greater rift being the two sides of the Aes Sedai, but it does feel like, at least with this subgroup of Saladar, the greater rift is between the Aes Sedai and the Dragon Reborn.
Yeah, I thought the biggest surprise for any of the individual Aes Sedai in this chapter was Alana, right? Because she is the one who I felt like I had locked in. And now to know that she was so worried about having damaged or ruined Rand kind of very much softens her from the like, no, I will take what I want, it doesn't matter, that it kind of felt like she was at a few chapters ago. And I think that plays into what you're describing as kind of like the gradations of the Aes Sedai and how complex their politics are. It's important to remember that Alana is this kind of like font of information, but also technically hasn't chosen a side in the rift in the White Tower, even though she's here clearly helping the Saladar group.
And my read on Varen is that Varen is also stuck between the two groups. Is that fair, right? That she has strong ties to members of both sides. And so these two actors seem sus for being here, getting themselves here. Never mind the bonding without consent. But for getting here and being, perhaps a key part of whoever's numbers needs to make the play. It makes me worried, I guess the analogy is like party politics. When you hear the third party candidate is like really like left leaning and you're like, oh, that you're not actually a third party. You're just a chunk of one side and not, you're a chunk of the Democrats. You're not actually a legitimate third party in some ways. That's really unfair. I'm so sorry, anybody who votes that way.
This is why we need ranked choice voting.
but it also feels like that, where it's like, you're just dividing one side into pieces. And so it makes me nervous. So I guess we'll see what happens. But back to my opening comments, that's one where it's like, I wasn't really expecting this chapter to or this plot to evolve in this way. And that's why this week felt so significant, because it's like, they're basically ready. I mean, this could be a one day more type chapter almost if they're going to make their play. But I think we'll get a little more before whatever happens. But there ain't a lot of book left is, constantly on my mind when we get this deep.
Yeah. I guess my last question is, do you have any thoughts about the politics side of this chapter? We get like a lot of flash-ins with different characters. It's worth noting, if you are kind of tracking these characters from the past, we start with most friendly to Rand and end with most likely to betray Rand. But that's all I really got for analysis of these characters. We've heard their names a couple times before.
I was mainly thinking these are names I'll never remember for our game. Even more of those names, and so I certainly wasn't really tracking them because I just knew they weren't in my head in that way. That means when I move to that kind of politics white noise, I always come down to it's way messier than you think it is. Like the strength of Robert Jordan is he doesn't paint people with a single shade.
Yeah.
They're all over the place.
Yeah, no, they never have a single color, not even the color of trust. Chapter 44. Matt pays for someone to be a guide and to find a place for them to sleep in Saladar, and insists that the band not accept any favors, and then he starts hanging banners on the stable that he has rented, and it seems to get him nowhere. Everyone he knows is seemingly avoiding him and can't be found, and there is even continuing celebration for Egwene being raised, but he can find no one he knows among the revelers. Eventually, he dances with a beautiful woman named Halima, who keeps trying to lead the dance. As he walks away from her, his amulet becomes cold, and when he turns around, she seems surprised. They begin singing a song in the camp called Trust is the Color of Death, and as they begin to sing the song, Matt asks about Halima and finds out that she is just an assistant and not an Aes Sedai, and then Matt half recognizes Brigitte, and she sees him dancing with an ugly man, and as he is thinking about this, he starts to remember some of his old memories, including the fact that he wrote the song that is currently being sung. He wonders if he can trust Egwene when Myrelle appears, and she offers Matt to be her warder and asks if Egwene has already bonded him. He more or less tries to flee as quickly as possible when he runs into Siwan and asks her to dance because he doesn't realize who she is. At this point, Lyanna introduces herself, and she decides to dance with him and eventually give him quite a thorough kiss, as the narration describes it. Matt eventually goes to his stable, not quite understanding how Siwan and Lyanna are both back and channeling, and eventually Talmanas says that Matt needs more guards around them because Avienda can't be completely trusted anymore. At this point, Matt starts thinking about rumors that he's heard about the town, and then eventually he refuses numerous offers to be a warder, including from Myrelle again, and then after another day, he is summoned before the Amerlin. All of the women are there, including Avienda in a dress, and Egwene tells him that he is to go to Ibudar or leave the village entirely. He agrees to go to Ibudar, and then Matt gives orders for the band to stay close to the Aes Sedai if they eventually move. Talmanas insists on sending a man with him since Nalshan, his other leader, is going to go with Matt, and he eventually sends Nerim along with him. Matt thinks of all the challenges the band will likely face, and eventually a group gathers, including Brigitte and the two Aes Sedai with white hair, which Matt notes is extremely rare, and also their extremely old warder. Tom eventually apologizes for avoiding Matt, but apparently Elaine threatened to punch him, and Matt apologizes about what he said about Tom's letter, but Tom eventually says he didn't know if it was good news or not. Tom then asks Matt if he remembers Eludra, and Matt more or less dismisses the thought immediately before musing that they'll be back in 10 days. Tom says that is not possible given how long it's going to take them to get to the city, and Matt then immediately stops listening to Tom. Vandine then approaches, asking him about Tavirin, and Matt asks why it will take so long for them to travel, but she is told that neither Vandine or Adelias are able to travel, and that it is Elaine who is in charge of the traveling. Eventually, he is told that they want to avoid accidental damage to anyone in the area, and eventually Egwene arrives with her entourage. She is curt and tells them to stay out of trouble, and particularly to keep Matt out of trouble. Everyone eventually has to dismount because the portal is not large enough for them to get through while mounted, which Matt seems very upset about this. The girls eventually seem irritated when the other Aes Sedai decide on a slow pace, and Matt worries that the women will cause trouble for him. We then switch into Egwene's POV, who hopes that Nynaeve and Elaine can keep Matt in line, as Ramonda and Lelaine both independently agree that Matt is quite a bit of trouble. Eventually, Egwene thinks that the band has served its purpose and that they will have to ride quickly to catch up with Gareth Bryne. So this is a chapter that's mostly about Matt encountering people in camp, but I actually found it quite enjoyable. There's a lot of Matt figuring things out, which is more fun than it really has any business being. What did you think of The Color of Trust?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm quite as positive as that, and it might be just expectations. Like when I saw it was a Matt chapter, I got excited because I was like, "This will be really fun." And even as you just described it, there, it's like it's kind of one joke, which is Matt is behind everybody else and says dumb things, and then is shown how things really are. And I don't know, it wore thin by the end, and maybe that's me wanting that character to have a little more presence and get a little more respect. And that might just, again, be because I like him, even though he's kind of always been a D-bag. So
yeah, that's fair. I think that this is a good place to say, I think that this is a good Matt chapter because it's not about Matt. I think that I actually have a lot more fun watching Matt observe a lot of other people than I do when Matt is like going and doing things, right? Matt thinking about stuff is the more fun side of that coin to me. I want to point out a couple of little details in the early part of the chapter that I think are kind of telling. The first is Matt's interaction with Halima. I want to do a quick refresher. Do you remember who Halima is?
No.
Okay. Halima, also known as, think I'm getting this right, Erengar, is a Forsaken who was once killed and brought back to life, before was a male Forsaken, but now is in a female body. And so she has attached herself to one of the Aes Sedai and Saladar as an assistant, and now seemingly is getting involved with Matt, and it seems channeling at him at one point or another. And it's worth noting the other Aes Sedai around don't seem shocked by that channeling, which makes me wonder, is Halima channeling the male side of the One Power, even though they are a male soul in a female body?
Okay. None of that registered with me, so I will just nod and say, interesting.
Excellent. The other thing that I'm not sure if this is important or not is Matt's reaction to Birgitte. Because I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago when Matt first arrived in Saladar, there was a moment where he went, oh, I recognize that face from my past life, and then he kind of walked past and didn't think of it because he thought of something else. And our kind of hypotheses for who that could be were like, maybe it's Halima, because like maybe her body was like really old because it's a Forsaken, right? Maybe it was Birgitte, or maybe it was some other Forsaken that was in Saladar for some reason. Well, in this chapter, we get Matt's reaction to both Birgitte and to Halima, and neither of them are quite that reaction from the previous chapter, which has me really curious whether like he saw Moghedien outside of her disguise for some reason, or if there's some other Forsaken that was in Saladar, and we should be curious about what they're doing here.
Again, did not register, but I will nod and say interesting.
That's mostly what I've got as far as big revelations. I thought that the scene with Morel trying to convince Matt to be a warder was really interesting, because Matt doesn't consider it at all, but this kind of gives us a new character to be keeping an eye on, and Morel, the woman who won't quite go as far as Alana to get a Taviran as a warder, but will ask 8 times, makes me wonder what Morel is going to get up to once Matt leaves town.
Yeah, I actually, the consent issue just was what came to mind most for me. That's like, oh, she's at least towing the line, right? Yeah. And even if she's annoying. And, you know, I think my sympathies with Matt there were like, yeah, I would never sign up for that, right? Like, it just feels so natural. Like, why would you give your life over to that cause, especially when Matt is almost in that kind of relationship with Rand when it comes down to it?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good observation, is that Matt, I think, feels much less tempted by all of this because he feels like he already has something, right? I think if he didn't have a promise to Rand and these ties to Elaine and Nynaeve and Egwene, I don't know if he'd be tempted to be a warder, but I think he would at least feel the pull of something. And right now it's very clear he's like, no, I know what I'm doing and I will ignore everything else in my path. And, good, because I don't want to see Matt tied up in Saladar for too much longer. It's more fun if he goes out and does things. One last note in that like dance around sequence was Matt's reaction to Siwan and Lyanna, which I thought was just fun, What were your thoughts on kind of that first third of the chapter in general, but that scene in particular?
Well, it was fun, and that's a kind of scene we've seen already. More hints about the Aes Sedai face, and just this gag about it actually reminded me of Back to the Future, right, where Marty's mom hits on him, right? It's like that kind of thing. You're my ma, right? So it did feel like that. One thing I don't think popped up in your summary, but I noted in my notes, is that he references his medallion, his Fox medallion, quite a few times in this section, right? That I think we are meant to be bearing in mind that he can't be fully manipulated. And that just in my head now popped with your earlier comment about how somebody is channeling and affecting him. The medallion is supposed to prevent Aes Sedai, so it seems like we should just say that person is not Aes Sedai, and might also reinforce that they are using the male power.
Yeah, so I think we have a really strong hint here that Halima channeled, which would be very odd because she's surrounded by Aes Sedai and no one notices. And then there's also questions later on. Matt is like, is that Halima again, or is it someone else? And so I think you're right to be like, everyone is a suspect. This is a giant party of channelers. And while it seems like the medallion does stop male or female channeling, it doesn't tell him which it is. And so it gets really messy in this area where I think Matt is at this point just happy to get away from so many suspects for who's causing his medallion to get so cold. And no, I think that's a really good read. Is that motivates, I think, probably a lot of why he's so curt with Morel and some of the other characters, is he just wants to get away from whatever is causing him to be channeled at repeatedly.
So there's 1 point for me. Take that. I also, just to confess, by the time I got to this chapter, I had injured my back, so I was pretty deep on painkillers while I read this. So if I missed some cues, I want to give myself that excuse.
Absolutely fair. What did you think about the pink rabbit that hopped around throughout the chapter, or was that just the drugs?
I chased it so hard. It was awesome. No. I like how I was like really panicked for like half a second in the middle of that question. I was like, what? Yeah. But then I realized what you were doing.
I actually really liked the interaction a little bit later in the chapter between Matt and Telmanis and Nalshan. This relationship that we've gotten like slowly developing, even though we barely remember the characters' names. I basically always think of it as like Matt has like 2 seconds, and Telmanis seems to be the like really capable one, and Nalshan seems to be the other one, is always kind of how I remember them, even though I know that's probably not fair to that other character. And just seeing them have the negotiation of like, well, if Nalshan's going to go with you because he knows the city, then Telmanis' butler has to go with you, is like A, very first world problems, and B, just I think it made me feel that Matt is developing those relationships, even though we haven't seen them develop much on screen at all.
Well, and a reminder of this power he seems to have, right? Because I do think some of the other actions we're describing make him seem like not a good leader, or at least not thinking kind of strategically. And these are kind of reminders that he has that power and has been influencing others and, like you're saying, grooming good lieutenants and seconds and so on.
Yeah. Now, once he gets to the big group with all of the women in the Aes Sedai kind of preparing to leave, you mentioned earlier the hints about the Aes Sedai face we're getting with Siwan and Lyanna. We get another one here with the 2 Aes Sedai that are traveling with Elaine and Nynaeve, in that they have white hair. And Matt notes that is extremely rare among the Aes Sedai. Now, we also know from some previous chapters that Vandene and Adelias, these 2 Aes Sedai, were retired prior to the split with the Tower, so they are considerably older than most Aes Sedai. So it's worth noting Matt is looking at probably 2 of the oldest characters in the entire series, and his comment isn't they have wrinkles, his comment isn't they look like grandmothers, his comment is they look like Aes Sedai but with gray hair. And I think that kind of gives you a little bit more of that like context of what it is like to age if you don't get stilled like Siwan and Lyanna. It is so subtle, it's just the color of your hair that's notable, the difference between like 60 and 200.
I mean, that's the life I'm living, right? You can just see a little salt in my pepper, and that's it. I look otherwise youthful, or I will keep telling myself that.
My hair, on the other hand, is 95% salt. I actually just recently heard an interview where one of my favorite kind of character actors who is on Critical Role, she noticed that all three of her characters reached a point where they don't age, and she was like, I don't know what that says about me psychologically, but that's kind of how I feel about watching the Aes Sedai. I'm like, Robert Jordan, you had a thing about women aging or something, right?
Which just takes a self-effacing joke and makes it just a little bit creepy in pure Robert Jordan fashion.
100%. I was very interested at the end of this chapter in the intergroup politics between Elaine and Nynaeve and Vandene and Adelios. It seems like the two older Aes Sedai acknowledge the girls as Aes Sedai, but kind of grudgingly, and seem to defer whenever what I'm going to call the girls make a suggestion, but whenever there is something that they really care about, they just say what is going to happen, right? They set the pace before Elaine or Nynaeve have any chance to give any input. And I'm curious whether you agree with Matt that that is going to be trouble for this small group making their way to Ibudar.
Well, I think the title of the chapter and that dynamic you're describing made me think a lot about the Cold War phrase "trust but verify." Right? It's like they're gonna trust that these women deserve to be Aes Sedai, but they are verifying every step and they're controlling every step that matters. So
Yeah.
I do think anything that splinters the group is difficult. And whether they deserve to be Aes Sedai or not, I think we have seen time and time again that Elaine and Nynaeve do not subtly, achieve their goals. They kind of bumble and stumble and luck into whatever positive outcomes they get. So I think I can see if that is the only way they've been able to achieve other things, that is going to be much harder to do with these women kind of dragging them back to the kind of proper way to do things, quote unquote.
But you know who's the best bumbler and stumbler in the land? It's Matt Cawthon, so we'll see whether his luck will hold up against these Aes Sedai. I actually thought the last little section of this chapter was kind of fun to see Egwene finally tell us a little bit about what her plan actually looks like, of using the Band of the Red Hand to kind of play the locals off of whatever that she is doing with moving the Aes Sedai, and it seems like she's really pleased with how this plays out. She knows the band is going to follow them. She knows that that is going to be useful for her in manipulating the politics, and it was just kind of fun to see Egwene finally feel like she's got to win instead of just plotting.
Well, and I don't know if it was exactly that or just some of her dialogue and so on, but I was like, this felt like Egwene is in command, right? I'm not sure she's making the right choices, but she is getting to make the choices and seems to be pretty capable. So, we're like 200 pages from the end, so I start to do the where are characters landing question in my head as I read this, and it's like, if this was the end of the Egwene plotline, which seems possible, I don't know if I'd say probable at this point, but it seems like we have to cover what's happening in Ibudar, and as I just predicted, we would see something happen with the Aes Sedai and Rand. Ain't a lot of space left for 3 more chapters of Egwene navigating politics, and so kind of getting this note that she's so capable and is managing her factions and different things well, that's not a bad place to land in a book, even though I don't think I'm quite saying I think that's happening. It just could, and I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, no, and I think it's the interesting thing about this book in particular is I feel like it more than any other book, it feels through the first maybe 2/3 that it is setting up a lot of things, and then you reach a point where you go, oh, but all of these can't explode in this book. There's just not enough room for it, and I think we're kind of reaching that point. Now, we only have 5 weeks left, is why we're talking like there's barely any book left. Next week, we will be covering 2 chapters. That is Chapter 45, A Bitter Thought, and Chapter 40... Oh, nope, those are what we... No, it's A Bitter Thought, but I wrote down 46, The Color of Trust, which is wrong. What is Chapter 46 called,
46,
Greg?
Beyond the Gate, and I won't spoil it for our listeners, but I was very excited when I was writing down those names and I saw the chapter icon on 45. we'll see if those, that excitement is met, or if that's a kind of a red herring of a chapter icon. But I have realized that we're, as we said, circling the end of this book. And there are some characters who haven't participated much at all, and maybe some of those didn't participate a lot last book either. So it's interesting to think about this kind of longer trajectory that we are now on. So we thank you for that. We thank you for your patience. For anybody wondering, we are still, we're upset about the news about the television show, and that has taken covering the third season off the front burner and put it towards the back burner. But we are still planning to cover it. We're just going to probably delay a little bit into the fall. Summer travel and family stuff and so on has gotten in the way a little bit. But we will get there. And Jeff Bezos gets in the way of everything, man, right? Like, just the villain of it all. Although I was just having an interesting conversation about, like, so much of the legacy of Lord of the Rings is tainted by it just continuing on and on and on, meaning the Lord of the Rings film series. And so, like, every once in a while it's just good to get just a little bit and leave them wanting more. Although, we also could have felt that way in another couple seasons easily. So anyways, that's wild speculation and raising a totally new topic within the last 30 seconds of this episode of Through the Glass Columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, Amazon, or our wives. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, find us on Instagram or Threads by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being a part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, leave us a review wherever you are listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time on Through the Glass Columns.